Dear God, Jesus and Isaiah and others have called us to fear not. In these days where danger and the unknown can constrict our hearts, let us hear their call, that we may trust in you, not to show everyone how faithful we are, but that we may become alive to your purpose, trusting in you without fear. May we be a people of open and generous hearts, powerful vehicles on this earth of your justice, generosity, goodness, and love. Tonight, let us listen deeply and hear how we, even in the midst of these times, especially in these times, might grow as more faithful stewards of the grace, goodness, and abundance we have found and we have known in you. It is in the name of the ones who have taught us not to fear, but to trust, that we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Very fortunate to have Dr. Walter Collier with us tonight. Dr. Collier is a deacon in his church and a social scientist and researcher whose work has supported institutions like Howard University and Princeton, the Episcopal Church, a number of federal agencies and other organizations. He led research on financing the historic Black church through the Interdenominational Theological Center. And that's how I first heard of his work. And so we've had some great conversations over the last weeks, and he has got a lot of wisdom and will be inspiring and also clear. He's a deep thinker and a wonderful thinker. And so I will just say I'm looking forward to this presentation, and I know that you all will enjoy it. Dr. Collier.
Thank you very much, and good evening to you all. My aim this evening will be to try to contribute to the thinking and actions of church leaders with regard to issues of financing, especially during this pandemic crisis and all of the things that the crisis brings about. Things of anxiety, fret, what to do next, how do we go on from here, and I hope to at least give you some answers to those questions. But I need to set the context for my presentation, and I want to do that by defining what it is, or what it means to be a faithful steward. And so on the first slide that is about to come up, you will see a definition that I put together myself, and hopefully it will make sense to you. For those of you who may not be able to see it, I will just read it. Faithful scholarship, I'll be all right. Faithful stewardship is taking care of and using resources in a wise and effective manner, in keeping, this is important, with the will and commandments of God. Now, ordinarily, when you talk about, or when you hear conversations regarding financial stewardship, it's kind of secularized. The points of importance go to profit and loss, costs and benefits, dollars and cents, ratios of risk, et cetera, et cetera. But here in our community, that is the community of the church, it's a little different. How we view stewardship and even how we view money is colored by our relationship with the Lord and his statutes and his will. So we are not going to do what most people might expect, talk about stewardship strictly in terms of dollars and cents, because we have an obligation that we have to meet in terms of how we handle stewardship. Also, as you can see on this slide, this faithful stewardship is really a mindset. And it's a mindset, it's a way of perceiving and approaching things, and it's all informed by faith. To not really mean to preach to the choir, but we walk by faith and not by sight. And so our stewardship has to be engined and determined by our faith walk. And so this is what I want to set first, and then some of the subsequent things that I will talk about will make sense, because I want to keep this in context. The next thing to address, I think, is the pandemic itself. Where no one knows why this pandemic is occurring. No one knows why it is taking the toll that it is on humanity and causing all kinds of difficulties in the lives of the world. This time of anxiety and fear, we have a responsibility, we have a right feel, so to speak, of people who need us, who need the things that the church can provide, comfort, instruction, guidance, those kinds of things. Now you might say, now why is this guy Collier talking about these things when our concern is really about the fact that we can barely pay our mortgage? We're concerned about how we're going to keep the lights on, and I don't understand where he's going. Well, have a little patience with me, and the road that I'm taking will become clear as I go on. But keep in mind that this is a point for us to grab onto an opportunity to help others. Now, looking more towards ourselves in terms of the things that we are concerned about internally in the church, it is also a time for us to reset. And what I mean by that, to stop, maybe restart, and not restart in actuality, but restart in terms of looking at how we approach the things we are approaching. Namely, are our ministries really directed the way we want them to be directed? Are our operations really relevant to the needs of the community that we serve? Are our expenses in tune or in keeping with what we're doing? Are there excess in spending on this item or that item? This is a time for us to review and perhaps re-strategize how we go about doing things. And this takes us to the next slide. There are a number of things that the church can do. And these are a mixture of practical as well as spiritual. But rather than, once again, I emphasize, not do anything or be overwhelmed by the fact that we don't have money to pay the bills, we need to figure out some other things that we can do for people. Because to the extent that we truly are Christians and that we do walk by faith, and the church is called out. The church has a responsibility to do things, and it should not be concerned about what's going to happen tomorrow. So while paying the rent and what have you are very important, they should not drive exactly what we do and how we feel. So let's go through some of these things that the church can do. The first point I have here, and it might seem like elementary, why do I bother to have it? But whatever we do in terms of trying to deal with our financial situations, we cannot leave God out of the equation. He can't be left out of the picture. Because once we do that, then we begin to look like the world. And to the extent that we look like the world, it makes it more difficult for people outside of the church to see the uniqueness of the church and how different it is from the world. And if they can't distinguish us from the world, then what's the sense? What is our purpose? Okay, moving along and becoming just a little bit more secular than I've been so far. We need to develop, and when I say we, I'm talking about churches who are going through changes financially or organizationally. And these are moderate-sized churches and small churches. Now, even large churches might be going through some difficulty, but financially, I don't think they are really suffering. But be that as it may, they can also learn from this next point. We need to develop a plan. Churches need to have some kind of strategic plan for now and for the next 2 or 3 years, including a contingency plan. We have no idea how long this pandemic will last. We don't know what might be coming after it, but we do know that something will be coming after it. And so what we should do as good stewards is to plan for the worst, plan for the contingency, plan for the unexpected. Now, that may seem like a contradiction in terms, but it's not really. We can plan in terms of what do we need basically? What are our essentials? There are certain things that a church needs, but many churches have a lot of things that they don't necessarily need, but they have them anyway. And so we need to plan in terms of like a family. We need a roof over our head, we need food, we need bedding, and we need clothes. We don't necessarily need 5 iPhones and 8 computers and things that are really excessive. So the church needs to plan as to what they essentially and basically need in case there is another catastrophe coming down the road, be it health or economics or climate, whatever. But we do know one thing is that these catastrophes are coming. The Lord warned us about it. He said, you will have tribulations. You will have difficulties. So we shouldn't be surprised. And when they do come, we shouldn't be standing in the middle of the sanctuary, scratching our heads, trying to figure out what to do. We should be prepared for these things. A good steward is prepared as much as he or she can be prepared. There's some things that are just not in our control, but we should do the best with what is in our control, and we can plan. Now, part of that planning may turn out to be streamlining expenses, cutting back on what we spend our money on, cutting back on how we use the tithes and offerings that come into the church. I've talked to some pastors and suggested that, you know, if you're having difficulties paying your mortgage, then maybe you should think in terms of sharing space with another church. Now, that may make economic sense, but from a doctrinal point of view, that gets some pastors and priests bent out of shape. Well, I can't share space with it, You know, this is not, like the Lord says, you know, my church is a church for all people, all stripes, all faiths. He didn't discriminate. And if it comes down to the church surviving, if it means that it makes sense for one church to share space with another and to have their services at a different time, then we should go and do it. We stand to gain one thing, survival. If we don't do that, and we let ourselves be overburdened and crushed by mortgage or rent debt, then we're out of operation. And we're not doing what the Lord wants us to do. So sometimes, you know, church leaders have to put aside the fact that they are this denomination or that denomination and do what's needed. to carry out the will of God. There are other things that churches, I'm sure, can do to cut back on their expenses. And they need to streamline. Because in order for the churches to be resilient and able to withstand certain tsunamis of different stripes, we have to be able to stay afloat. And to stay afloat often means cutting back, downsizing, down to the point of essential things. And we should think about that not only now because we're in a crisis, but we should think about that in good times. Don't wait till the bad times come to think strategically. And I don't know, and I'm not being critical or judgmental, but I don't know that all churches think that way. But we should. We should. Another thing that churches should be doing, and this is on this slide and the next slide, I believe also, is giving to people who are in need by way of community-based programs or special kinds of services. Now, this might seem kind of counterintuitive to people who are struggling to pay their mortgage, but remember the context in which I am talking. God tells us to give. He didn't say give just when you have an abundance. He just said give. So even if you're worried about how you're going to pay the mortgage, if you survey, assess, or you're very aware of what's going on in your community and you know the needs, the church should try its best to address those needs. Now, it may not necessarily be money that the church is being asked to give. It may be expertise on the part of the staff in the church. It may be the connections that the pastor has with a social service agency. It may be experience. It may be the God-given ability of some people to comfort others, even in the midst of the worst crisis situations. Those are the things that we can give, and they should be given. So while we are concerned about how we're going to pay our bills, we should not give up on giving to those who are in need. The church should be re-looking at the programs that it has now, community-based programs, from an evaluative point of view. Are they working? Are they not working? What can we do to improve them? Do we really need them? Are they really serving the immediate needs of the community? And right now is when our communities need us the most. And this is especially relevant to small churches in poor areas, to Black and brown churches whose congregations primarily are from the labor force, low class, low and middle class, and certainly the class that is most discriminated against in this country. They need the church. They need the church to step up. So again, what I'm saying, what I'm asking is for the church, notwithstanding the fact that you have financial concerns, your eyes should be looking outward, not inward. They should be looking outward. And there are benefits to doing that. People in the community, when they see that a church is focusing on their needs and are concerned about the things that concern them, they are more likely to give to the church when they're able to give to the church. That was one of the findings in our national finance church study that was done in the mid-90s. The three major factors that determine the extent to which people give to the church, that is tithes and offering. One is satisfying their religious needs, coming into a sanctuary that is warm and welcoming and hearing a message that is directed to them and being shown love by the church leaders as well as the fellow congregants. Two, the fact that the church has programs and concerns and services directed toward the poor and the needy. Because people like to see that their contributions are going to something worthwhile. And when they see that their contributions are going to help the community, they will give more. And thirdly, if there is accountability shown by the church leaders in terms of the finances and where they go and the status of the church, if that's communicated openly and clearly, then people will give. So those three factors, and there are many more factors, but those three factors are most prominent, at least they were in the study that we conducted, that caused people to give. And we found that those findings were the same, whether we are talking about Black churches or white churches. So especially during a time that we're going through now, a very difficult time, if the church continues to give of themselves as much as they can, there's a payoff. I hate to use the term payoff, but I can't think of anything else right now. But there is a benefit, and we should not minimize that at all. So even if you're worried about how you're going to pay bills, if there's something that your church can do for the community that's not going to cause you to get into any more financial debt, then you should do it. There's been a lot of talk about getting a loan to get out of financial difficulty. Loans are seductive and sometimes deceptive, even though we've been told that, well, they can make you feel better because they'll pay off your bills, or at least they'll defer payment of them for a while. It has been my experience that churches who need a loan should carefully consider getting one. Because once you get a loan, and this is, common sense anywhere in and outside of the church community, you have to pay it back. And if you're struggling and you get a loan to pay your bills and some other catastrophe comes about and you're going to have to struggle again, you're going to be in even deeper debt. But if you must get a loan, this is the only way that the church board sees that you can continue to operate, to survive, then you should get a loan that has an extended repayment schedule. Now, there's a trade-off there. The longer the repayment schedule, the more interest you end up paying. But if you get one that is sufficiently stretched out in time, at least you know that you won't have to struggle to make your payments. And then if the economic situation for you turns around, you can double up on your payments to kind of counter the interest costs. But you should make repayment easy to do. And some of the best loans are those loans, if you meet a certain set of criteria, they are forgiven. They turn into grants or gifts. An example of that we all probably have heard about is the Payroll Protection Program, part of the CARES Act. And what that does, it allows small businesses, small community organizations, including churches, to apply for a loan, a certain amount, and if you maintain the same financial obligations, that is staff salaries and utility bills, for a short period of time during the beginning course of the loan will be forgiven and it becomes a grant. It becomes a gift. Funny, the reason why it's been so, the monies have been so gobbled up so quickly by organizations who really are not that in need is because of this gift stipulation that's attached to it. That if you maintain the same difficulty you had in paying your bills for a certain period of time, then the loan is forgiven. That's great for small churches, for struggling churches, for poor churches, because it relieves them of having to repay the debt. But the downside of this payroll protection program is that most small churches have a bank that they do their business with in terms of deposit and withdrawals, but they don't necessarily have a banking relationship with that institution. They don't have a personal banker. And as it turns out, the PPP requires that you go to your local bank, and the bank is actually the one that initiates and shepherds through the application to the federal government for these PPP funds. So if you don't know anybody at your bank, it's not likely that you're going to get the kind of assistance that you really need. And of course, this is all in addition to the difficulties that Black and brown church leaders have just because of racism in this country in getting a loan, or even getting a relationship with a banker within a bank. But the point I'm trying to make is that while the PPP funds may seem attractive, they are not easy to access. And so what small churches need is some advocacy organization to work with them to navigate this application process. Otherwise, they're going to lose out and they're not going to be able to access those funds. So while the spin on TV may say, oh yeah, there's money here for the churches as well as da 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 da, it's not easy to get to. And there's stiff competition, as we might assume, for these funds. There are organizations who easily get approved for funding and they don't really need the money. But hey, it's there for them to ask and they get it, and if they can get away with it, they take the money. But that makes it more difficult for the churches to access funds that they may need. So again, if you need a loan, think carefully about it. And if you have a banking relationship, you're good to go. If you don't, then you need to develop one. You need to go to your bank and talk about the church and talk about its needs and talk about the fact that you would like to apply for some of these care funds and that you need help. If the bank is not forthcoming and not really willing to help, then you need to find an advocacy agency that can help you do it. And there are agencies out there that can do it. I can't give you any names because they differ by locality. You know, what might be called the church advocacy group here where I live may be called something else where you live. But you need help in terms of navigating this crazy process of trying to get funding from the government to help. But again, keep in mind that a loan may be, if the loan that you get is not forgivable for one reason or another, is something that has to be paid back. Another source of income, another Well, actually, this has a dual benefit. Grants from the government or grants from foundations can serve multiple purposes. One, they obviously can be used to help the community, depending on the nature of the grant. But also in grants, there is a thing called administrative overhead. And sometimes that can help a church in terms of their overall overhead. Now, I'm not suggesting that you apply for a grant at Ford Foundation just so you can pay your electric bill. That's not the point that I'm making at all. But I am saying that in your devising ways to service the community better than you have already, seeking a grant is one way. And one of the benefits of doing so is the administrative overhead. That does help. Lastly, communicate to your church what you are doing or what you would like to do. I mentioned that in the ICAM study that was done back in the 90s, accountability was one of the key things that determined whether a congregant would give to the church on a consistent basis. Church members need to know exactly what the church leaders are facing and what they're doing about it. Now, many church leaders will say, well, you know, we're poor and we need you to make your offerings. You have to say what's going on. Why are you poor? What's going to happen if offerings are not continued? What are the likely scenarios? They need to know the real deal. They need to know the full picture of where the church stands at. Because then they feel like they're part of the church. They're part of the family. They're part of the body that runs the church. They feel like partners. And if you can get them to feel like partners in this faith work that we're involved in, then they're more likely to give. They're more likely to even give more. It's amazing. I've been told, and I witnessed this also, in very, very poor congregations that you think that they won't be able to give more than $13 a week, can sometimes surprisingly come up with $300 or $400 or $500 a week. You never know, but if you motivate and you're truthful and open with people, they will give. Now, some other things I don't want to neglect mentioning that you can do during this time where we are physically asked to be separated from one another. Streaming online your church service should be done if you can. That way you maintain the contact with your congregants so they don't feel lost, they don't feel alone. And also it offers you an opportunity to remind the congregants that paying their tithes and offering is still an important thing and needs to be done. And if you're able to stream online, you should make it easy for people to make their offerings and their tithes. Make it as simple as possible. The most common way would be, of course, by a credit card or a debit card. Or for those who don't have credit and are not able to get those kinds of cards, there are other ways that they can give online through Western Union and other venues. But the important thing is that we need to stay in contact with the members of our church family. And you can stream online, even if you don't have a website. There are free programs that can be used to develop a simple website, just so you're able to maintain the contact with people who have been in your church. I think I would probably have exceeded my 20 minutes. So I would like now to open up to questions or comments or contributions.
Thank you, Dr. Collier. I think I'm looking through the chat and noticing quite a few notes of appreciation for the presentation, for the information. People hopeful to have access to your PowerPoint. If you approve that, we will link that for them.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Oh, okay, Aaron, go ahead and ask a question. You'll do faster than I can read them.
Yeah. So my question deals with how we communicate long-term planning to congregations. I think that in some cases, because we are talking about limited resources, we communicate things in a scarcity paradigm that may not be helpful for overall financial health and overall generosity of the congregation moving forward. So I just wanted to see if you had some ideas on how to communicate long-term planning, especially long-term planning in critical times such as this. If you have any ideas about how to communicate that, functionally talk about that with your congregation in ways that sound, I don't know, generous or abundant versus.
Even though strategic planning is a kind of a formal thing, you know, it was developed by the military. But the best way to approach it is to talk about planning as a family would talk about planning around the kitchen table. How are we going to fix up this house, or how are we going to save for X, Y, and Z, or how are we going to budget our money for food? I would make it very informal and relevant. And I wouldn't even call it strategic planning. This is a kitchen table family discussion about how we're going to move from point 1 to point 2. And I would start with letting everybody know that they have a voice in this, because you have to have buy-in, you have to have agreement, you have to have a feeling that I'm being accepted in this. And once that's established, then you can begin to talk about the needs of the family, i.e. the church, and how those needs are playing out during this crisis, and how we need to plan for tomorrow, so that we know, you know, we'll have a certain amount of money to get, you know, a can of beans and I mean, keep it that basic. As if you keep it basic and relevant, people can identify with kitchen table discussions in a family very easily. But hopefully these won't end up in fights, you know, as some kitchen table meetings do. But that's one approach that I would make. Another, I would establish a committee within the church, people volunteering to be on the committee, who would act as, let's say, planners. And they would meet every so often, and someone like yourself or some other leader in the church would have a guide for them to follow. And the guide would run something like this. All right, so today we're going to address what our goals are, and just get those set, and then stop until the next meeting. And then at the next meeting, all right, how are we going to carry out these goals? How are we going to implement them? And then maybe the next meeting, what are the resources that we need to carry out the goals, and what resources do we have and what ones don't we have? And then a following meeting, you might talk about, well, who's going to be responsible for part 1 and goal 2 and goal 3 and so forth and so forth. So I would do it in steps and I would make sure that people feel that they are a part of the process. And those people in that group will then be witnesses for the rest of the congregation. They would be representatives for the rest of the congregation. Is that at all helpful?
Yes, I do think that's helpful.
Okay.
If I might add a little bit of thought with that, I appreciate that you encourage the witnesses of your committee. I called it a task force. I actually pastor 2 congregations, and I'm thinking 5 years ago when we were getting the one congregation out of our building, it had to be black and white on paper. This is how much money we spent last year. This is how much money is coming in. Do you really want to keep being church? And what is it going to look like? So that's a part of the real transparency and the difficulty. So many times in congregations, I think it's, oh, you know, the finance team will take care of that. And people are not as aware of the details as they should be. So that was important. And the task force, just a lot of things about it. But when we first started the meetings, there was a covenant laid out so that everybody knew their voice mattered and that nobody would discount them, that nobody would change anything they had said, but they'd all be honored in the conversation.
Yes.
And then when the task force got busy and doing their work, absolutely reported back on a regular basis. And when I did interviews later, after we were successful in moving out and in selling the building, the interviewees, all of them, named how much they appreciated the communication, that we had actually done a good job of it.
Yes.
It thrilled me to no end because it's a scary thing that we're going through, and it was then too. Who knows what it's going to look like? But trying to also ground it theologically. Like you've already told us tonight, remember to pray, remember we're relying on God. But I appreciate very much what you're sharing tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
Something of a different nature subject is one of the discoveries is that, and we should have known it all along, I think, that when people are not in-person worship or at in-person worship, their offering envelopes don't come with them. And I've been working, I've served about 15 interim churches, and that's a pattern. That those folk who don't show up regularly, their envelopes don't show up regularly, and have been a proponent and have begun to discover that it can make a difference if in our working in the area of helping people to be good stewards, that one of the ways that can happen is that there are the resources. For example, for about 5 years now, my wife and I have our church contributions automatically programmed. Every Monday morning, the offering shows up in the church's bank account, and it's there, whether I'm there or not. We're away from our homes 3 months out of the year in the winter, plus probably another month or month and a half in the summer months. And I think those things make a difference in terms of understanding, helping people, working to help people understand what stewardship might mean. God's blessings still come when you haven't been to church. And I think that makes a difference.
Thank you, David. Dr. Collier, do you have anything you want to say in response?
I just wanted to make a small comment. I know all your years of experience, you've probably tried all kinds of things to get people to pay their tithes and their offerings. From my experience, a combination of things consistently done seems to have somewhat of an effect. And that's using things you already heard of, I'm sure. You know, pledge cards, and sermons and teachings that deal with the importance of offerings and tithing and stewardship. And the whole push of doing that is to get people to be serious about their commitment. If you are truly committed to Jesus, you're committed to your church, then you'll be committed to paying your offerings and your tithes. This is your contribution to your house, which is also known as the body of Christ. If you're serious about all of these religious things that you profess verbally, then it ought to show in terms of your giving. And some people look at it as a way of shaming people who don't give, but it's not really shaming them. It's just pointing out to them what it means to be committed to the church, committed to God, and being a good steward. And after those things, if people choose to continue doing what they were doing before, i.e. not giving, then so be it. But in the process, you are able to turn some people around so that they see that they have not really been all that committed, and now they decide, to be more serious. So the point that needs to be made, these efforts need to be consistent. They can't just be a one-time event. It has to be something not harped upon every week by the pastor or the priest, but certainly addressed frequently and on a consistent basis. And time, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I just say, Ed, to that, amen. It's got to happen all the time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it does. It does.
I want to call us into an awareness that we've had a great hour, and we probably could have another great hour, but I also know that people, I'm finding people say that they're busier in some ways with the advent of Zoom and other kinds of tools in their lives. Yeah. So I want to honor that you all have committed this time, and it's great that you all have done this. Dr. Collier, very fascinating and lots to think about in what you presented. I'm deeply grateful for all your work and wisdom in sharing that with us. And we will, I think Katie has sent out the PowerPoint, so that's good news for folks who want to review that. And also this will be up at some point for people to review as well. So thank you all for being here. I wanted to also mention that if you go to the Walker page, you'll find some other recorded interviews. They're not interactive like this, but focusing on some things like leadership in times of disruption, things about how we use innovation and creativity to problem solve in times like this. We'll have some more of those coming up as a part of our Insight series. So please give the Walker Leadership Institute page a look and see what resources are there, including an interview with Jennifer Hillman, who's a community leader. And that'll be our offering this month in lieu of our monthly breakfast.
We end with gratitude and appreciation for Dr. Collier and his presentation tonight, and Steve for bringing him to us through the Walker Center. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So good night, everyone. God bless, and we'll see you back here next week.